What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with a little project that I've been working on. This has kind of been one of the biggest pet peeves for me over the course of the last handful of years, where it feels like a lot of times in this industry we see stats thrown out like, hey, proximity between 125 and 150 is going to be important this week, or that's where the majority of shots come from. And while that may be a true statement, I do not think it is actually reflective of how golf is played, quite frankly. To say the majority of shots are going to come from one range does not take into account Dustin Johnson versus Kevin Kisner or Ches Reavie, guys that might be 50 yards apart. You know, Dustin Johnson might have a wedge in a dozen times, and Ches Reavie might hit 7-iron in a dozen times. And when you're only comparing one specific range, I think you're in trouble. So that if you know me, that's something that has been a bugaboo for me. I never use that because I just don't like it. And I've always kind of thought, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. Flash forward to last week or so, Matt Jones, who is at Matt Jones TFR on Twitter, tweeted out something along the lines of proximity predictions. I don't remember. He might have called it exactly that. Where he basically was taking, I assume, I don't know how he was calculating it, but was taking, average driving distance, I assume, and basically simulating out where approach shots would come from for every golfer. And that kind of clicked in my mind like, yeah, this is the path we need to be going down. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you proximity predictions for the RSM Classic. And we're going to take the scorecard and we are going to take every single player based on how they actually hit the ball, based on driving distance, based on the strategy they normally take on par fours and par fives. And then we are going to compare it to how well they score from those specific ranges. So if one guy hits 10 shots around from under 100 yards and another guy hits 10 shots around from 150 to 175, we can't use the same proximity group to compare both of them. So each golfer will then be compared to their own expected play, how they play in those ranges, and we will get an expected number of birdies or better for each round. So something I'm very excited about dipping my toe into because I think this is really a logical way to go moving forward. So I really hope you enjoy this. This is a project that I enjoyed working on. Let's get to it. All right, so what I've started with here is a few things. I've loaded in the RSM Classic, just like the scorecard, right? So you've got each hole, what par it plays to, and the yardage. And this is for the Seaside course, RSM Classic. You know, if we want to do this in other weeks where there's only one course, that will probably be easier. But there's two courses here in Sea Island. So this is the Seaside course scorecard. And then what I've also done is I've brought in the par 4. This is a really important stat, and I wanna pull it up for you. Quite frankly, the PGA Tour has a lot of really kind of wild stats, but some of them are really good. So there's a couple different ways we could have gone about doing this. I could have just used driving distance, which if you click on any one of these stats, it tells you what the definition of it is. So driving distance, which is something that we use, all the time, you have to understand that only comes from 2 holes per round. So if you scroll down to the bottom of these, they will show you, here it is. Here's the definition. The average number of yards per measured drive. These drives are measured on 2 holes per round. That's it. Care is taken to select 2 holes which face in opposite directions to counteract the effect of wind. Drives are measured to the point at which they come to rest regardless of whether they are in the fairway or not. So that's driving distance. So keep that in mind. Then you also have something called driving distance on all drives. So now this is using the shot link data, not necessarily just those 2 holes. So, I mean, this would also count guys that are taking 3 wood off the tee, 3 iron off the tee, whatever it is. So here it is. Average number of yards for all drives where the distance was measured by a laser. Very straightforward. That's a shot link type of stat. So we only have that on courses that are using shot link data, of course. But then there's one that I think is pretty interesting. or I guess there's a couple. It's percentage of yardage covered by tee shots. And then it has it broken down, percentage of yardage covered by tee shots on par fours and then on par fives. So let's look at par fours. And we'll just read this here. The definition of this stat is for those par fours where the tee shot was determined by a laser, so that means shot link, the percentage of the hole distances that are covered by the tee shot. This is computed by taking the total distance off the tee and then dividing it by the total distance of the hole. Note, if the tee shot exceeds the distance of the hole will be used, etc. Okay, so if you have a drivable par 4 and you hit it past the hole, they're just going to count it as 100%. So what I'm using this one for par 4s and par 5s because I like the idea of the percentage of yardage. To me, is going to also account for golfers that decided to lay back on holes. So these golfers know what their good ranges are, right? So if they want to just blast it down there as far as they can, that's one thing. If they want to play back to 150 yards or 125, whatever a good number is for them, they're taking that into account off the tee. They're doing their own calculations, and this stat is a bit more reflective of that. The reason I want to use this is because I don't just want to use driving distance, because driving distance is like, okay, hey, they pulled driver, they banged it out there 300 yards. Like, this is actually more indicative of how many yards I expect each golfer to have left, because this is more strategic on their side. So that's what I'm going to use. I don't know if it's perfect, but that's what I'm going to use here. So I've pulled this stat in, and you can see, Patrick Cantlay, he seems to just pull driver all the time, which is something we know about him. It's only 8 rounds, but he's the leader here. 74% of the par 4s he covers. Someone even like Gary Woodland, who we have seen lay back at times, he's like 38th on this list. He covers 70%. So you can kind of see how these guys take on. So it's actually kind of a combination of distance and strategy involved here. So it's pretty interesting. So then what I'll do is what I started to do here, and I'll finish here, is I took the yardage for each hole. I pulled over each golfer's distance of the hole that they cover on a par 4. So in this case, Webb Simpson covers, let's see if I can find Webb here, like 69.24%. That is what Webb Simpson covers. So I said, okay, if he covers 69%, that leaves 31% that he doesn't cover. So that is likely going to be his distance remaining on the first hole. So the first hole is 417 yards. You give me 31% of that. Webb Simpson should be coming in from about 128 yards. Obviously, this is highly dependent on what club he chooses, the wind, the conditions, variance. I understand all of that. I'm just trying to level the playing field a little bit for each one of these golfers to get a general idea of the distances they're going to be playing in with. And you can see there's a pretty big range. So Webb Simpson leaving himself with 128 yards on the first hole. Then you have someone like Ryan Armour, who doesn't hit it as far, will probably leave himself 142. That's 14 yards difference. And the important part of this is basically, if you're only looking at proximity stats for the field as a whole and saying how good are they from 100 to 125 yards, because that's where the majority of the shots are going to come from. That is the quote we hear week in and week out, and I hate it. Ryan Armour is in a different tier than Webb Simpson is in this scenario. Or Aaron Wise is actually a better example. Aaron Wise would be in the proximity from 100 to 125. Ryan Armour would be in 125 to 150. So if you're only using one of those categories, you are not accounting for the shots for these guys. So it makes me insane. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through and I'm going to pull over the distances remaining for each one of these golfers. And then what I'll do is continue it and count up how many shots they have in each area. So you'll see, but this is where I'm going in a second. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to make progress here, but in like 1 second, you're going to be back here and you're going to see the progress for the rest of this. All right, so what I have here now is I've filled out every golfer and where their approach shot should come in from for the par fours and the par fives. I didn't touch the par threes. Um, and then I counted them up. So here are the number of shots or the number of holes that Webb Simpson and every golfer will have from under 125, 125 to 150, 150 to 175, 175 to 200, and 200 plus. The reason I chose those is because I want to use birdie or better percentage. I don't want to use proximity numbers because they don't go deep enough for me. I just want to say, okay, he makes a birdie from this range, this percent of the time, assign that to however many shots he's going to hit from there, and try to calculate this out. So when you go to the PGA Tour, the birdie or better percentage, it only comes in those 5 categories. I know the proximity ones can actually go, I think there's like a 100 to 125, there's a under 100, but I'm just going to use these 5 ranges. And what you'll see is there's some pretty big discrepancies here. For example, Webb Simpson, in theory, should hit 11 shots from 125 to 150 on approaches. He should hit it on 1 and 2, 4 and 5, 8, oh no, not 8, just kidding, 4 and 5, 10, 11, 13, 14, 16, and 18. Now, here's the problem. This isn't a problem. This is the solution to the problem. The original problem is if you would have said that 125 to 150 was a very important range for this week, sure, it might be very important for Webb Simpson because that's where he's going to land quite a bit of the time. Aaron Wise is only going to hit 3 shots from there because he's so long off the tee and he takes on these par 4s and par 5s. He's going to have 9 shots from under 125 yards. So you would have been wrong to use 125 to 150 for Aaron Wise. Same with Scotty Scheffler. He's a long hitter too. He's only going to hit 5 shots from this range per round, right? So that's a big, huge difference. So this to me is while this is not exact, I completely understand all of the variables. This is a much better way to look at things, in my opinion. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to pull over the birdie or better numbers from each one of these ranges. And then what we'll do is we'll say, okay, you know, if he's going to play 10 shots from here and he makes birdie half the time, I expect 5 birdies. And we're going to do it like that, almost like an expected birdie or better percent. And then we will see which golfers have the highest expected birdies per round on the Seaside course. So again, this will just be a second for you, but I'm going to go pull the data and mess with it. All right, so here's what I've done. I now have the birdie or better percentages from each one of those 5 ranges for every single golfer in the field. And sorry, lost my track here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the expected birdies or better per round based on where I believe their approaches are going to be coming from, which is based on a combination of driving distance, the scorecard, how aggressive a player is. So in my brain, this is a pretty logical approach to this. Of course, there's flaws. I understand it, but this is a pretty logical approach. So what I'll do is this. So I will do, just so I can show you this. So Webb Simpson is going to hit 1 shot, in theory, from under 125 yards. We will multiply that times the 43% of the time that he makes birdie from this range. So if he only played that 1 hole, we would expect him to make birdie 43% of the time, and basically, so that now he has 0.43, 4/10 of a birdie assigned to him for that shot. So then we're going to do the same thing for every one of these ranges, and we're going to add them together. So we're just going to say, okay, then add that to his 11 shots from 125 to 150, which he makes a birdie at 25% of the time. Then we are going to add in the 0 shots from 150 to 175 that he makes birdie 18% of the time. Then we are going to add in, same thing, 175 to 200 that he makes birdie what is that, 10% of the time, and then we are going to add in the 2 shots from 200 plus. Those are the par 5s that he makes birdie on 44% of the time. Birdie or better, excuse me. And when you add all of those up, what it comes to is basically the way that we expect Webb Simpson to play the Seaside course is that he will make, on average, 4.07 birdies or better each round. Now that is only for the par 4s and par 5s. It does not include any of the par 3s. So when you do this for other golfers in the field here, you can see, and I can add in the guys that don't have any data. We don't have any shot link data on them yet, or they haven't played enough rounds on the PGA Tour. I'm using 2020 data, so this will get better as we go. So like Horschel and Kuchar aren't on this list because they don't have PGA Tour rounds on shot link this year. So anyway, like you can see, 4.5 birdies expected out of Charles Howell, 4.5 out of Harris English, only 2.6 out of Adam Hadwin. That 125 to 150 range for him, in which we expect him to hit 11 shots out of, is pretty bad for him. He's only made birdie 13% of the time. He's actually better from 150 to 175. So if he starts laying back a little bit, in theory, he should be making more birdies. But it's pretty interesting. So we can go through these, and what I'll do is I'll add in the salaries just so that this makes sense, and I will clean this up, and I'll get rid of the guys, or I'll do something with the NAs just so that you can see like there's no data there. But then I will share this document so you can view it in the description below. I'm going to continue to expand on this. I really like the idea of this. I probably want to build it into one of my tools as opposed to just doing it here in this Google Doc and having a lot of manual stuff. I'd like to kind of be able to pick any set of this. So remember, this is only for the Seaside course. They are going to play the Plantation course as well. I might go through and do that at some point. If there is, I'll add another tab at the bottom. But go through and check this out and let me know what you think. I think this is a really logical approach and a good way to kind of figure out what we would expect from these golfers using the proximity stats, but not using it in a way where we put everyone in the same bucket. So I'm very happy about this. Again, shout out to the work that Matt Jones, I believe, has done, who kind of got this whole thing brewing in my head a little bit. But yeah, we're as an industry, I think we should continue to head down this path and see what happens. So hopefully I can be a part of that. All right, let me know what you think. Tweet me. It's at RickRunGood, or leave a comment below. Later.